The envelope felt heavier than it should, offensively beige and stiff with the self-importance only certified mail can possess. I stood there at the curb, the cheerful chirping of birds mocking the impending doom contained within. My mailbox, a standard-issue black number identical to every other one on Primrose Lane, suddenly felt like a harbinger. Final notice. Violation hash HOA 734, B. Garden bed compliance failure. Seriously. Compliance failure? It sounded like I'd staged a coup against the Beige Republic, not built a couple of nice cedar planters for my tomatoes. All this because they were, according to the meticulous measurements of one Karen Sterling, HOA president and reigning queen of suburban nitpickery, precisely 2.5 inches too tall, and stained rustic redwood instead of the soul-crushingly dull approved taupe. 2.5 inches. I walked back up the driveway, the offensive beige rectangle clutched in my hand like a dead rodent. Sarah was in the kitchen, humming along to some podcast about unsolved mysteries. Appropriate, really. The mystery of how Karen Sterling slept at night, knowing she was crushing the horticultural dreams of a middle-aged IT manager, remained unsolved. They did it, I announced, waving the letter like a battle standard. They actually sent the final demand, certified mail and everything. We have 14 days to dismantle the offending structures, or face fines, liens, and possibly ritual sacrifice at the annual Neighborhood Watch barbecue. Sarah sighed, pausing her podcast. She had the look of someone bracing for impact. Dave, honey, we talked about this. Can't we just sand them down a bit? Or paint them taupe? It's hideous, I know, but is it really worth fighting World War III over? It's the principle, Sarah. I practically vibrated with righteous indignation. It's my therapeutic dirt. It's the last bastion against the creeping tide of soul-crushing conformity that defines this neighborhood. Besides, I lowered my voice conspiratorially. Taupe is the color of surrender. It's the color of giving up. It's the color Karen Sterling probably dreams in. Okay, Captain Ahab, she said, pouring me a coffee. But remember what happened when Mr. Henderson tried to install that slightly too large satellite dish? He ended up paying $3,000 in fines and had to take it down anyway. Henderson caved too easily, I muttered, staring out the window at my beautiful, thriving garden beds. My creations, built with my own 2 hands, sweat, and probably a few misplaced swear words over 3 glorious weekends. Cedar, sturdy and smelling faintly of the forest, filled with rich, dark soil I'd lovingly amended. Fat tomatoes were blushing red on the vine, peppers hung like jewels, basil perfumed the air. They were alive. Unlike the chemically green, unnaturally perfect lawns stretching in every identical direction, this whole saga hadn't started with certified mail, of course. It began subtly, as all suburban skirmishes do. First, the anonymous note, tucked under a rock on the planter. A concerned neighbor kindly suggests consulting Bylaw Appendix C, Section 8 regarding appropriate planter dimensions and approved color palettes. Maintaining uniformity protects our shared property values. Concerned neighbor. Right. I knew exactly which concerned neighbor wielded that passive-aggressive pen. Then came the drive-by warnings during Karen's power walks, visor pulled low, eyes scanning for infractions like a hawk spotting a field mouse. Morning, Dave. Lovely day. Just wanted to give you a friendly heads up, those beds look a tad high. Might want to double-check the guidelines. Her smile never quite reached her eyes. Friendly heads up escalated to beige envelope #1, official warning. I tried reason. I sent polite emails with photos, highlighting the aesthetic appeal and the negligible height difference. Ignored. I called the HOA management company and got a robotic voice reciting rules. I even tried offering Karen a bag of my first ripe tomatoes, a genuine peace offering. She declined stiffly, saying something about uncertain provenance and potential pests. Pests? My tomatoes were practically organic royalty, which led me to the HOA tribunal, held in the community clubhouse's soulless meeting room. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sickly pallor on the proceedings. Stale coffee brewed in a corner urn. The bored Karen, flanked by her loyal lieutenant Mr. Henderson, whose lawn was rumored to be maintained by elves, it was so perfect, and two other nodding figures, sat behind a long folding table, looking grim and important. I presented my case like a lawyer arguing before the Supreme Court, only my evidence was photos of cherry tomatoes and a tape measure. I spoke of the simple joy of growing one's own food, the therapeutic benefits of gardening, the way it fostered community, minus Karen, apparently. Tittered, and as you can see, I concluded, holding up Exhibit A, a photo showing the beds barely cresting the 26-inch mark. The difference is truly negligible. They enhance the property, provide fresh produce. Karen cut me off, her voice crisp and devoid of warmth. Mr. Miller, while your enthusiasm for horticulture is noted, Bylaw Appendix C, Section 8, Paragraph 2A clearly states, and I quote, "Raised planter boxes shall not exceed 24 inches in height from ground level." Yours, by your own admission and our official measurement conducted by Mr. Henderson last Tuesday, measure 26.5 inches. Rules are rules, Mr. Miller. They ensure harmony and protect our shared property values. Mr. Henderson nodded vigorously. Indeed. Precedent, you understand. Allow one oversized planter, next thing you know, someone paints their front door chartreuse. A collective gasp rippled through the two other residents who had bothered to attend, probably just for the stale coffee. The motion to enforce removal passed unanimously. Harmony. Right. More like enforced blandness. I left the clubhouse fuming, muttering under my breath about petty tyrants and the soul-deadening effects of beige paint. That night, fueled by righteous anger and several cups of coffee that tasted suspiciously like defeat, I found myself hunched over the HOA bylaws binder. This monstrously thick document, obtained after filling out 3 separate request forms, was a masterpiece of bureaucratic obfuscation. Pages and pages detailed the precise acceptable shades of off-white for trim, the maximum allowable gnome height, 8 inches apparently, the designated days for trash can visibility. I skimmed sections on sheds, max 8 feet tall, approved designs only, fences, max 6 feet, white vinyl or approved wood stain, gazebos, pre-approved kits only. It was suffocating. I was about to give up, maybe just buy a can of taupe paint and accept my soul's slow death, when my eyes snagged on Appendix G, structures, non-permanent and decorative. I read it again, and again. Sheds, fences, permanent structures, all meticulously regulated for height. But trellises? Arbors? Vertical supports for climbing plants? The language was vague. It specified maximum footprint, to prevent people building second houses disguised as tomato cages, presumably. Materials, no rusty scrap metal, darn. But height? For a non-permanent, decorative, vertical garden structure? There was nothing. A loophole. A glorious, beautiful loophole big enough to drive a truck through, or maybe build a tower in. Okay, I muttered, grabbing a pen and a napkin. The traditional medium for genius architectural plans. Planters max 2 feet, sheds max 8, fences max 6. But what if it's not a planter box on the ground? What if it goes up, way up? What if it's technically a freestanding vertical plant support system, an artistic expression of horticultural ambition? The idea started as a tall trellis, maybe 10 feet, but the lack of a specific height limit in Appendix G gnawed at me. Why stop at 10? Why not 20? 30? The image bloomed in my mind. A towering structure, dripping with defiant greenery, visible from Karen Sterling's perfectly regulated front porch. I found Sarah reading in bed. "Honey?" I began, trying to sound casual. "You know how Karen hates my tomatoes?" "Vividly," she said, not looking up from her book. "How'd she like them 50 feet in the air?" She finally looked up, her expression a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. "Dave, what are you planning?" I grinned, a slow, maniacal grin that probably made me look slightly unhinged. "Malicious compliance, my dear. Pure, unadulterated, vertically integrated malicious compliance." The next few weeks were a blur of obsessive research and questionable decisions. My browser history became a terrifying landscape of hydroponics forums, DIY vertical farm tutorials. Grow 500 pounds of lettuce in your closet. Structural engineering websites usually frequented by people building apocalypse bunkers, and searches like maximum height non-permanent structure loophole HOA and scaffolding rental cheap. My initial designs, sketched on napkins, graph paper, and the back of credit card offers, looked like something Dr. Seuss might build after a bad trip. Jenga towers of PVC pipe, elaborate lattices held together with zip ties, and hope. I built a small prototype in the garage using leftover plumbing parts. It immediately sprang leaks from 6 different joints, spraying nutrient-rich water all over my workbench and the lawnmower. In a late-night ordering frenzy, I accidentally bought 500 gallons of concentrated hydroponic nutrient solution instead of 5. The delivery guy looked genuinely concerned when he dropped off the pallet. Explaining the intricacies of nutrient film technique, NFT hydroponics, to Sarah was met with a blank stare and a quiet suggestion that maybe I should talk to someone. "It's brilliant, see?" I enthused, gesturing wildly with a dripping PVC elbow. "The water flows down, feeding the roots directly. Minimal soil, maximum yield. We could grow enough basil to supply every Italian restaurant in the state." "Uh-huh," she said. "And how tall did you say this basil fountain is going to be?" 50 feet, I said proudly. "Give or take." She just sighed and went back to her book. Realizing napkin sketches and leaky prototypes weren't going to cut it, I decided to call in professionals. Or at least people who owned tools and weren't afraid of heights. My first calls were to established, reputable contractors, the kind with shiny trucks and logos on their shirts. Contractor 1. "Hello, Miller Construction." Me. "Hi, I'm looking to get a quote on building a, large vertical garden structure in my front yard." Contractor 1. "Okay, like a big trellis? Raised beds?" Me. "Sort of, but taller, much taller, around 50 feet. Contractor 1. Silence. 50 feet? 50? Me. "That's the plan." Contractor 1. "A 50-foot garden in your front yard? Sir, are you prank calling me?" Click. Contractor 2. Sounded younger, maybe hipper. "Yeah, custom decks and patios. What's up?" Me. "I have a project, a bit unusual, a freestanding vertical hydroponic tower." Contractor 2. "Hydroponic? Cool, cool. How big we talking?" Me. "About 50 feet high." Contractor 2 chuckles. "Whoa, buddy. 50 feet? You need city permits for something that tall. Probably an engineering study, stamped plans. Insurance alone would be insane. You got architectural plans?" Me. "Well, I have a sketch. On a napkin?" Contractor 2. "Right. Uh-huh. Look, man, sounds wild, but that's way out of our league. Good luck with that." Click. Contractor 3. Gruff voice. Johnson & Sons Contracting. Me. Yes, I need a quote for erecting a tall metal structure. Contractor 3. Like a cell tower? Radio antenna? Me. No, more like scaffolding, but permanent, for plants. Contractor 3. Plants? Me. Yeah, 50 feet of plants. Contractor 3. We build decks, patios, additions. We don't build, plant skyscrapers. Maybe try NASA. Click. Okay, so reputable was clearly the wrong approach. I needed people who were less concerned with things like permits and structural integrity reports and more interested in cash and weird projects. I found them via a slightly water-stained flyer tacked to the bulletin board at the local hardware store, nestled between ads for lost cats and lawn mowing services. Rusty and Chip's odd jobs, no job too weird, reasonable rates. Rusty and Chip turned out to be two lanky guys who looked like they subsisted entirely on beef jerky and energy drinks. They arrived in a battered pickup truck that seemed held together by rust and optimism. Rusty, the talker, relatively speaking, chewed gum with intense concentration. Chip mostly nodded and occasionally offered one-word observations. I showed them my latest sketch, now slightly more detailed and drawn on actual graph paper. So, I explained, trying to sound confident and not at all like a man whose sanity was fraying. It needs to be structurally sound, probably metal framing. Needs to support multiple levels of planters or growing channels, maybe 20 tiers. Integrated hydroponic plumbing system, strong enough to withstand wind, about 50 feet tall. Rusty stopped chewing for a second. Tall, he observed. Chip nodded. Lots of plants. Rusty resumed chewing. Got it. Chip squinted at the sketch. You want lights on it? Grow lights, yes, I confirmed. Lots of them, for year-round production. Rusty grinned, revealing a couple of missing teeth. Gonna look like Vegas for vegetables. Exactly, I beamed. Finally, someone who understood my vision. Cash up front for materials? Rusty asked. Naturally, I said. They were hired. The arrival of the flatbed truck carrying several tons of galvanized steel framing and industrial-grade scaffolding caused the first major ripple in the placid pond of Primrose Lane. Curtains twitched. Dog walkers paused mid-stroll. Mr. Henderson actually stopped mowing his lawn diagonally, a Thursday ritual, to stare. Then came the noise, the clang of metal, the whine of power tools, the rhythmic thump of Rusty hammering something that probably shouldn't have needed hammering. And the mess. Dirt from digging the foundation footings, slightly larger than planned for stability, Rusty assured me. Scraps of metal, PVC pipe shavings, empty energy drink cans. Karen Sterling began incorporating my house into her daily power walk route, sometimes circling twice. Her phone was always subtly angled towards the growing metal skeleton in my yard. Passive-aggressive notes reappeared, tucked into my mailbox. No postage required, naturally. A reminder that construction noise is limited to 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. weekdays per Bylaw Addendum F. Please ensure all construction debris is contained and removed daily. One afternoon, she caught me supervising Rusty and Chip as they wrestled a particularly long steel beam into place. Mr. Miller! Her voice cut through the clangor like a laser. What is that monstrosity? I turned, wiping sweat from my brow, and offered my most charming, non-threatening smile. Just some vertical gardening, Karen. Very eco-conscious. Reducing my carbon footprint, maximizing my green space, you know? It looks like an oil derrick, she sputtered, her face turning an alarming shade of puce that clashed horribly with her visor. I am quite sure this violates multiple codes. Multiple! Oh? I feigned innocence, mentally flipping through my dog-eared copy of the bylaws. Which one specifically? I've read them cover to cover, fascinating stuff. Appendix G, Section 4, Trellises and Vertical Supports, is rather vague on height restrictions. Wouldn't you agree? As long as the base footprint is compliant, which I gestured to the concrete pad, it meticulously is. Her eyes narrowed into slits. We'll see about this, Mr. Miller. We will see. A few days later, as the tower clawed its way past the 30-foot mark, a police cruiser pulled up quietly to the curb. 2 officers got out, looking profoundly unimpressed by the suburban drama unfolding. Karen watched from her porch, arms crossed, radiating smug anticipation. "Afternoon, sir," said the older officer, adjusting his belt. "We received a call about an, unauthorized structure being erected." I immediately shifted into harmless hobbyist mode. "Officers, welcome. Just building a large trellis for my tomatoes. Got a bit ambitious this year, you know how it is." I chuckled nervously. The younger officer looked up. And up, and up. "That's a big trellis, sir." "The biggest!" I beamed. "Gotta give the vines room to climb." "Did you get city permits for this?" the older officer asked, his voice flat. This was the moment I'd rehearsed. I produced a slightly crumpled manila folder. "Checked with the city planning office," I announced brightly. "Spoke to a very helpful lady named Brenda, since it's technically a non-permanent garden structure under 150 square feet at the base and not attached to the primary dwelling. It falls under the accessory structure guidelines. And in our specific zoning, R1A, there's no specific height restriction for non-habitable accessory structures of this type, unless it interferes with utility easements, which it doesn't." I might have been stretching Brenda's interpretation slightly, but I delivered it with conviction. "It's basically just elaborate garden decor." The older officer sighed and keyed his radio. "Yeah, dispatch, code 4 on Primrose Lane. Looks like a civil matter between the homeowner and the HOA for now. No obvious city code violation from the street." He looked back at me. "Try to keep the noise down, sir. And, good luck with your tomatoes." They got back in their cruiser and drove off. Karen's face fell. I felt a surge of adrenaline-fueled victory, quickly followed by the dawning realization that I was now legally committed to owning a 50-foot metal tower in my front yard. The rest of the construction phase was a montage of minor disasters and near misses. Rusty, attempting to wire the first bank of grow lights, managed to cross something with something else, causing a brief but noticeable brownout that affected 3 houses down. Chip, connecting the main water line for the hydroponic system, failed to properly seal a joint on level 2. At 3 a.m., it gave way, sending a high-pressure jet of nutrient-rich water directly onto Karen Sterling's prize-winning peace roses next door. That resulted in a pre-dawn screaming match across the property line, ending only when I profusely apologized and promised her a lifetime supply of hydroponic lettuce, an offer she did not accept. During a particularly gusty afternoon, the entire structure began to sway in a way that suggested imminent collapse rather than gentle flexibility. Chip spent the rest of the day welding additional cross braces, muttering darkly about wind load calculations and center of gravity. Then came the squirrels. They viewed the towering structure not as a monument to horticultural defiance, but as the world's most elaborate apartment complex. They attempted to build a nest on level 3, using insulation stripped from my attic vents. My war against the squirrels involved humane traps. They just laughed at them. Ultrasonic repellents. They seemed to enjoy the frequency. And finally, blasting polka music from a portable speaker aimed at level 3, which actually worked, but earned me another note about noise violations. Okay, I thought, watching Rusty use a frankly alarming amount of duct tape to secure a dangling electrical conduit. Maybe hiring 2 guys whose primary qualification was willingness Wasn't the most structurally sound decision, but we're 40 feet up now. There's no turning back. Must grow defiant vegetables. Finally, after 6 weeks of noise, chaos, and near bankruptcy, it was done. Standing 50 feet tall, a bizarre skeleton of gleaming metal scaffolding, interwoven with a complex circulatory system of white PVC pipes, festooned with dangling wires and bristling with sockets for the soon-to-be-installed grow lights. It dominated the street. It blotted out the sun for Mr. Henderson's prize-winning petunias at certain times of day. It was horrifying. It was magnificent. It was the emerald monolith of spite. Neighborhood reaction was mixed. Teenagers thought it was sick. Several dads stopped by, ostensibly to complain, but ended up asking detailed questions about the hydroponic setup with poorly concealed envy. Mrs. Gable from 3 doors down, a sweet old lady with a mischievous glint in her eye, knocked on the door and asked if she could rent a plot on level 4 for her prize-winning orchids. Karen Sterling, however, maintained a stony silence, communicating only through increasingly frantic emails to the HOA board and, I suspected, the City Zoning Commission. A local blogger who specialized in suburban oddities posted a picture. Weirdest HOA dispute ever? Check out this 50-foot garden taking root in any town suburbia. #HOA Wars #Plant Tower. The post got a few dozen shares, then a few hundred. Then it was picked up by a regional news aggregator. "It's magnificent," I breathed, standing back with Rusty and Chip to admire our handiwork. In a terrifying, probably not up to code, might attract FAA attention kind of way. Rusty spat out his gum. "She's tall, all right." Chip nodded slowly. "Needs more zip ties." Now came the fun part, planting the rebellion. Getting 50 feet up wasn't easy. My old ladder barely reached level 2. I ended up renting a cherry picker for a weekend, much to the continued consternation of my neighbors. Perched precariously in the swaying basket, I began filling the hydroponic channels and hanging baskets. Tomatoes, Roma, beefsteak, sun gold, destined for the sunniest spots on the upper tiers. Peppers, bell, jalapeno, habanero. Those were aimed strategically towards Karen's side. Zucchini and cucumbers, trained to vine downwards. Beans climbing the vertical supports. Strawberries in gutters repurposed as hanging planters. Herbs galore, basil, mint, oregano, rosemary, filling the gaps. And for pollinators and aesthetic spite, cascades of brightly colored petunias and marigolds. On level 1, facing Karen's pristine lawn, I installed a small but thriving collection of Venus flytraps. Just because, so I programmed the automated watering timers and nutrient pumps, and then the pièce de résistance, the grow lights. Hundreds of high-intensity LED bulbs, bathing the tower in an ethereal, slightly alarming purple-pink glow from dusk till dawn. My house suddenly looked less like a suburban dwelling and more like a landing beacon for extremely health-conscious aliens. "Okay, guys," I whispered conspiratorially to a row of young tomato plants on level 5, adjusting a dripper line. "You have one mission: grow big, grow red, and annoy Karen Sterling. No pressure, but the fate of free gardening rests on your little chloroplasts." The tower began to transform. The stark metal softened under a cloak of burgeoning green, leaves unfurled, vines climbed, flowers bloomed. It looked even more surreal now, a vertical jungle oasis rising improbably from a sea of manicured beige conformity. Naturally, the legal response wasn't far behind. A thick packet arrived via courier, this time from Sterling, Henderson, and Stern, attorneys at law, presumably no relation to Mr. Henderson, but one never knew. Inside, a cease and desist order dripping with legalese. Threats of lawsuits, daily accumulating fines, liens on my property, forced removal and remediation at my sole expense. They cited vague city ordinances about visual blight, public nuisance, and potential zoning violations related to non-standard structures exceeding community aesthetic guidelines. They even threw in concerns about potential structural instability and light pollution. My first instinct was panic. My second was to pour a stiff drink. My third was to fight back. There was no way I was backing down now. I needed a lawyer. Not some slick corporate shark, but someone who understood the unique insanity of HOA battles. I found him through a recommendation from Mrs. Gable, whose nephew apparently specialized in unusual litigation. Barry Goldblatt was semi-retired, wore Hawaiian shirts to consultations, and had an office filled with dusty law books and novelty singing fish. He listened to my story with rapt attention, occasionally interjecting with magnificent or beautifully petty. "So, let me get this straight," Barry said, leaning back in his chair, hands behind his head. "They told you your flower beds were 2 inches too tall. So you built this?" He gestured vaguely upwards with his chin. "Dave, my boy, I love it. It's poetic justice. We'll argue it's expressive art, freedom of horticultural speech. We'll drown them in depositions about the definition of trellis." "Just keep it standing until harvest season, Barry," I pleaded. "That's all I ask." "Harvest season?" Barry boomed. "We'll keep this glorious monument to spite standing until it crumbles from old age. We'll file counterclaims. We'll question the structural integrity of Karen's birdbath. Leave it to me." While Barry prepared to unleash legal hellfire, the tower itself was taking on a life of its own. The local news story went regional, then national. #HO Skyscraper, #Plant Tower, and #Garden Wars started trending on social media. News vans became a regular fixture on Primrose Lane. My first TV interview was a disaster. I stammered, sweated profusely under the camera lights, and probably came across as completely unhinged. But somehow my sheer awkwardness combined with the visual absurdity of the 50-foot plant tower struck a chord. People saw it for what it was. One guy pushed too far by petty bureaucracy. My subsequent interviews got better. I leaned into the sarcasm. "Why did I build it?" I'd say, gesturing to the tower. "Well, the HOA has very strict rules about planter height. 2 feet max. They didn't say anything about 50 feet. I just wanted to grow some tomatoes without facing sanctions and potential exile. Is that too much to ask in modern America?" I became a minor internet folk hero. A symbol of resistance against overbearing HOAs everywhere. People sent messages of support, offered gardening tips, even started online petitions demanding the HOA leave my tower alone. Karen Sterling, meanwhile, refused all interview requests, occasionally being caught by news cameras peering furiously through her blinds, which only made her look worse. The HOA board started getting angry calls and emails from people across the country. The pressure was mounting. Then came the night of the long pruners. I woke one morning to find the main water feed line to the tower cleanly sliced through, not broken, cut, and several of my prize-winning beefsteak tomato plants on level 4 were mysteriously wilted, their leaves showing a suspicious black spotting. Sabotage. I didn't have proof, but I knew. It had Karen's meticulous, underhanded fingerprints all over it. Or maybe Henderson, her ever-loyal enforcer. I spent the day repairing the water line and installing some deterrents, motion-activated sprinklers aimed outwards, calibrated to just miss the sidewalk but thoroughly soak anyone lurking near the tower base, and a cheap security camera disguised inside a particularly ugly garden gnome I bought specifically for the purpose. I saw Karen doing her power walk later that day. I strolled out casually. "Morning, Karen," I said, my voice dangerously pleasant. "Funny thing happened last night." Someone tried to give my tower a little haircut, and some of my best tomatoes suddenly caught a terminal illness. Strange coincidence, right? Right after that segment on the national news? She didn't flinch, just adjusted her visor. I have no idea what you're talking about, Mr. Miller. Perhaps your contraption isn't as stable or well-maintained as you seem to think. These things happen. She gave me a smile that was pure ice and continued her walk. Oh, it was war. The final showdown came at a specially convened city council meeting. The regular meeting room was overflowing. News cameras lined the back wall. Barry sat beside me, wearing a particularly vibrant pineapple print shirt. Karen and the HOA board sat opposite, flanked by their stern-looking lawyer from Sterling, Henderson, and Stern. The HOA lawyer went first, presenting blown-up photos of the tower from its least flattering angles. He droned on about bylaws, zoning codes, aesthetic harmony, safety concerns. What if a tomato fell on someone? Light pollution disrupting migratory birds. Seriously? And the catastrophic impact on property values. Karen gave an impassioned speech, her voice trembling with indignation, about the importance of rules, order, and maintaining the character of the neighborhood that some people seemed determined to destroy. Then it was Barry's turn. He sauntered up to the podium, adjusted the microphone, and beamed at the council. "Distinguished council members, esteemed members of the public, Karen," he began. He proceeded to systematically dismantle the HOA's arguments with a blend of legal acumen and pure showmanship. He cited obscure case law involving garden gnomes and disputed fence lines. He presented printouts of supportive emails from across the globe. He argued the tower was a tourist attraction, boosting the local economy. Gas stations and coffee shops reported increased traffic from tower gazers. He even produced a sworn affidavit from Mrs. Gable, attesting to the tower's joyful contribution to neighborhood character. Finally, he called me up. My heart was pounding. I looked at the council, at the packed room, at Karen's stony face. I took a deep breath. I didn't talk about bylaws or zoning. I talked about the simple pleasure of digging in the dirt after a long day staring at spreadsheets. I talked about the frustration of rules that seemed designed only to stifle individuality. I talked about wanting to grow food for my family. "This tower," I said, gesturing towards the photos. "Yeah, it's big. It's weird. It's probably a little insane. But it started because of 2 inches. 2 inches of wood on a planter box. This whole thing, this media circus, the lawyers, the arguments, it's all because the rules stopped making sense. Maybe, just maybe, sometimes you need something big and weird to remind everyone that neighborhoods are about people, not just property values and matching mailboxes." I then pulled out a perfect, massive, bright red tomato I'd harvested that morning from level 6. "And maybe," I added, placing it gently on the podium, "they're also about really, really good tomatoes, grown 50 feet up." There was a moment of silence, then scattered applause. The council members looked thoughtful, maybe slightly bewildered. Barry winked at me. Karen looked like she might spontaneously combust. The verdict, when it came a week later, was a classic bureaucratic compromise. The city found no major unresolvable code violations that warranted forced removal. The structure, while unusual, wasn't deemed inherently unsafe or illegal under current ordinances. Victory. However, citing the HOA's bylaws regarding harmonious aesthetic integration and responding to the likely Karen-instigated complaints about nighttime light pollution, the council recommended, a thinly veiled order, that I limit the full grow light operation to hours between 7 a.m. and 10 p.m. Install some form of aesthetic screening or panels on the lower 10 feet of the tower facing the street. The suggested color? Taupe. Taupe? Of course. Karen got her pound of flesh, or at least her gallon of paint. Barry wanted to fight it, but I was exhausted. We'd won the war, even if Karen won a minor battle. I agreed. A few weeks later, the dust had settled. Rusty and Chip returned to install some taupe-colored lattice panels around the base. Looks classy, Rusty declared unconvincingly. The grow lights now clicked off promptly at 10 p.m., plunging the tower into dramatic silhouette against the night sky. The news crews had moved on to the next suburban absurdity. I stood on my lawn, looking up at the emerald monolith, now slightly less monolithic thanks to its taupe ankle bracelet. Plants cascaded down its sides, heavy with fruit. Bees buzzed happily around the marigolds on level 8. I reached up to a low-hanging vine on level 1 and plucked a perfectly ripe cherry tomato, still warm from the afternoon sun. I popped it in my mouth. Sweet, tangy, defiant. Sarah came out and stood beside me, slipping her arm through mine. "So," she said softly, "was it worth it?" I looked at the tower, a 50-foot testament to spite, ingenuity, and borderline insanity. I looked across the lawn at Karen's house, where she was pretending to prune an already immaculate rosebush, definitely not looking at me. I thought about the lawyer's fees, the sleepless nights, the squirrel war, the near brownout, the sheer unrelenting stress of it all. Was building a 50-foot botanical monstrosity complete with hydroponics and enough wattage to communicate with Mars the most rational response to a complaint about 2 inches of planter box? I mused. Probably not. Did it cost a small fortune, nearly get us sued into oblivion, and make us the neighborhood weirdos forever? Sarah added, smiling slightly. Absolutely, I confirmed. Would you do it again? I picked another tomato, held it up to the light. It glowed like a ruby. I grinned. Ask me after I've had this tomato. I offered her one. She took it, shaking her head, but her eyes were laughing. Across the lawn, Karen finally looked up. I gave her a little wave, holding up my tomato in a silent toast. She scowled and went back to her roses. The war was over. A strange truce settled over Primrose Lane. The neighborhood was forever changed, slightly weirder, definitely less beige, and home to the best, most ridiculously high-altitude tomatoes in town. And that, I decided, tasted pretty sweet.